Gabriel Daniels, the young and driven CEO of a successful beverage company called Daniels Beverages. Despite his ambitious career, his personal life felt incomplete. His wife, Priska, a popular social media influencer known for her beauty and motivational content, had a secret she had hidden from the public. She could not carry a child. Priska adored children, and for years, she begged Gabriel to adopt. "There are so many children who need loving homes," she would tell him. But Gabriel always resisted. "Priska," he said one evening as they sat in their elegant living room, "I understand your heart, but I want my own bloodline to continue. This company, my legacy, it's everything my parents worked for. I need a child that carries my DNA." Their disagreement caused a rift between them, but Gabriel's perspective changed when he was diagnosed with cancer at the height of his career. Knowing he might lose the ability to father children after surgery, he left a sperm sample at the hospital, hoping to secure his dream of becoming a father one day. Miraculously, his surgery was successful, and he beat cancer. Yet, the shadow of infertility hung over his life. Gabriel was eager to start a family, but Priska's health meant she couldn't conceive. When Priska suggested surrogacy as a compromise, Gabriel agreed. They found a willing egg donor, and the hospital began the surrogacy process. On the day of the procedure, chaos erupted at the hospital. A young college student named Jane Rivers had come for a routine medical checkup. In the confusion of a packed schedule, a doctor mistakenly inseminated Jane with Gabriel's sperm instead of the intended surrogate. The mistake was covered up by the hospital staff, who quietly deleted Jane's records to avoid liability. Meanwhile, Gabriel was informed that the surrogate was successfully pregnant. He was overjoyed, embracing Priska and sharing the news of their soon-to-be parenthood. Priska, however, masked her unease. While she had agreed to surrogacy to save their marriage, she feared that raising a child not biologically hers might strain their relationship further. Jane Rivers was a diligent college girl, juggling her studies and part-time work. Lately, she had been feeling fatigued and nauseous, which worried her. After a visit to the hospital for a checkup, she received a call from the nurse saying her results were ready. Curious but cautious, Jane decided to pick them up later that week. When she arrived at the hospital, she was greeted with a shocking revelation. "Congratulations, Miss Rivers, you're pregnant," the nurse said with a bright smile. Jane froze, staring at her in disbelief. "That's impossible," Jane said sharply. "I'm a virgin. You must have made a mistake." The nurse insisted the results were accurate and advised Jane to take it seriously. Refusing to believe it, Jane hurried out, determined to confirm it herself. Distraught and panicking, Jane stopped at a nearby pharmacy, bought a pregnancy test kit, and rushed into a restaurant bathroom to use it. Her hands trembled as she waited for the results. When 2 red lines appeared, confirming the pregnancy, her knees buckled, and the test slipped from her hand. How could this be true? She had never been with anyone. Meanwhile, Gabriel Daniels received a devastating news from the hospital. The surrogate he and his wife Priska had hired to carry their child had suffered complications, and the baby could not be saved. Gabriel, who had spent years longing to become a father, was shattered. His grief overwhelmed him, and unable to sit still, he decided to leave the office and head home. Jane, still reeling from the test results, stumbled out of the restaurant bathroom, clutching her bag tightly. She was so consumed by her thoughts that she barely noticed the sleek black car speeding down the street. The screech of brakes snapped her back to reality as she realized the car had narrowly missed hitting her. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Jane shouted, her voice trembling with fear and anger. Gabriel, stepping out of the car, looked startled but calm. "I'm sorry I didn't see you," he said, his deep voice laced with sincerity. Jane glared at him, still shaken, but something about his demeanor made her pause. As their eyes met, an unspoken tension filled the air. Gabriel's usually composed face softened as he noticed her teary eyes and trembling hands. For a moment, they both stood there, two strangers carrying their own burdens. Jane, overwhelmed by her emotions, brushed past him, muttering, "Just watch where you're going." Jane Rivers sat in her tiny dorm room, her hands trembling as she held her phone. Her childhood had been anything but normal, and now, at the cusp of adulthood, life had thrown her into chaos once again. She stared at Stephanie's last message on her phone. "You have to tell them, Jane. It's the only way to figure this out." Her heart pounded. How could she explain the impossible? How could a virgin be pregnant? Even Stephanie, her closest friend, had struggled to believe her, though she masked it with concern and kindness. Jane Rivers' family history was a tapestry woven with pain, love, and complicated relationships. Her mother, Elise, had grown up watching her own mother endure horrific abuse at the hands of Jane's grandfather, a ruthless politician who hid his violent tendencies behind a polished public image. Jane's grandmother, scarred physically and emotionally, passed away when Elise was only 12. Her death left a bitterness in Elise's heart that solidified her distrust of men. Determined to forge a different path, Elise found solace in the arms of a woman named Sarah, who became her lifelong partner. Together, they decided to have a child through a sperm donor, a man whose identity they chose to keep anonymous. To Jane, he was a phantom, someone who might not even know she existed. Her mothers never spoke of him, and she never asked. Jane's uncle, Jacob, was another reminder of the family's struggles. His life had taken a tragic turn when his wife, driven by paranoia, poured acid on him after falsely accusing him of infidelity. The truth emerged too late. It had been an innocent business trip. Scarred and battling health issues, Jacob was left to care for their two young children alone. The church, moved by his plight, had stepped in to support him, but his pain was palpable, etched into every line on his face. That night, Jane called her mother, Elise. The line crackled, and Elise's familiar voice brought a mix of comfort and dread. "Jane, is everything okay? You sound off," Elise said, concern laced in her tone. Jane hesitated. "Mom, I need to talk to you and the family. It's important." Elise paused, sensing the gravity in her daughter's voice. "All right, tomorrow morning. I'll call Jacob too." The next morning, Jane sat in the living room of her childhood home, surrounded by her family. Elise sat beside Sarah, their hands intertwined. Jacob sat across from her, his scarred face a silent testament to the pain he'd endured. His children played quietly in the corner, unaware of the storm brewing in the room. Jane took a deep breath. "I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Elise blinked, her face a mix of disbelief and shock. "Pregnant? Jane? How? You've never even—" "I haven't," Jane interrupted, her voice cracking. "I swear, I've never been with a man. I don't know how this happened." The room fell silent. Sarah was the first to speak. "Jane, honey, that's not possible. There has to be an explanation." Jacob, who had remained quiet, finally spoke. "Jane, are you sure? Maybe you just don't remember." "I remember everything," Jane shouted, tears streaming down her face. "Why won't anyone believe me?" Elise's hands shook. Her mind raced back to her mother's suffering, her own mistakes, and now this. Her daughter, the one hope for a better legacy, standing before her with an impossible claim. She felt the weight of generations of pain crushing her chest. Sarah tried to soothe her. "Elise, calm down. Let's think this through rationally." But Elise couldn't. Her mind spiraled into despair. "This family is cursed. My mother was destroyed by a man. I chose a woman because I thought it would break the cycle, but here we are again, drowning in shame and confusion." Jacob's voice was low but firm. "This isn't about curses, Elise. Jane needs us now. We have to figure this out together." Jane looked at her uncle, gratitude and anguish swirling in her eyes. I don't know what to do. I don't even know where to start. Stephanie's words echoed in her mind. You have to tell them, Jane. She had done that, but now what? The room was a storm of emotions, anger, fear, disbelief, and love, all colliding at once. Jane Rivers moved into her parents' house, hoping they would care for her and help her through the difficult time she was facing. Her pregnancy was a mystery, and her parents were determined to find out who was responsible. Her best friend, Stephanie, visited her often, offering support and encouragement. At the same time, Gabriel Daniels was heartbroken. He had just learned that he would never have a biological child because his wife's womb couldn't carry a pregnancy. For Gabriel, having a child wasn't just about being a father. It was about having a child with his own DNA to continue his family's legacy, something that had been passed down through generations. Priska, his wife, didn't share his view. She was scared of the idea of surrogacy and didn't want to go through that process. Instead, she wanted them to adopt a child, hoping it would be enough for Gabriel. But Gabriel refused, as he was set on having a child that shared his DNA. Priska felt frustrated and helpless, knowing they couldn't agree. However, Priska's facade of concern cracked when she visited her best friend to complain about Gabriel's growing distance. Her friend reminded her that her behavior was partly to blame for the strain in their marriage. She even brought up Priska's past, recounting the abortions Priska had during their university days and implying that her lack of regard for Gabriel's happiness was hypocritical. Furious, this angered Priska, who lashed out at Sophia for not taking her side. Gabriel, still recovering from the loss of the surrogate pregnancy, sought solace in long, quiet walks through the park after work. It was on one of these evenings that he spotted Jane, sitting alone on a bench, her face shadowed with worry and exhaustion. Compelled by an inexplicable pull, Gabriel approached her. "Are you all right?" he asked softly, his deep voice startling Jane from her thoughts. Jane hesitated, unsure of how much to share with a stranger, but something in Gabriel's warm, empathetic tone broke through her defenses. "Not really," she admitted, staring at the ground. "It's been a tough few months." Gabriel nodded, taking a seat on the opposite end of the bench. "I get it," he said after a pause. "Life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect it." For the next hour, they shared fragments of their lives, not the whole truth, but enough to feel an odd sense of comfort in each other's presence. Jane spoke vaguely about her mysterious pregnancy and her fear of the unknown. Gabriel, in turn, opened up about his battle with cancer, his longing for a family, and the pain of his recent loss. They didn't exchange names, keeping their identities as anonymous as their secrets. "It's strange," Jane said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Talking to you feels easier than talking to my family." Gabriel smiled faintly. "Sometimes, it's easier to share with someone who doesn't know your whole story. No judgment, no expectations." As night fell, they parted ways, neither realizing the significance of their encounter. But fate wasn't done with them. A few days later, they ran into each other at a quaint coffee shop. Jane was waiting for her order when Gabriel walked in, looking equally surprised to see her. "You again?" Jane said with a small smile. "Do you always bump into strangers twice?" "Only the ones worth meeting twice," Gabriel replied, his charm catching Jane off guard. They ended up sharing a table, and before long, their tentative connection deepened. Jane found herself laughing for the first time in weeks, while Gabriel felt a sense of peace he hadn't known since his diagnosis. Neither of them wanted to acknowledge the unspoken bond growing between them, one built on shared pain, but also on an unexplainable understanding. Over the next few weeks, their paths continued to cross, each encounter drawing them closer. Gabriel, who had always been focused on his legacy and family name, began to see life differently through Jane's resilience. Jane, who felt abandoned and overwhelmed, found strength in Gabriel's unwavering presence. One evening, as they sat by the riverside, Gabriel looked at Jane and said, "I don't know what it is about you, but you remind me that there's still good in the world, even when everything feels so broken." Jane looked away, her heart heavy with secrets she couldn't share. "You've been through so much," she said, "but you're still standing. That says a lot about who you are." Their words hung in the air, heavy with meaning neither could fully grasp. Little did they know, their worlds were on the brink of colliding in ways they couldn't imagine. As their bond grew, so did the suspense. The truth about Jane's pregnancy, the hospital's mistake, and Gabriel's connection to it all loomed like a shadow over their newfound friendship. Yet for now, they remained in blissful ignorance, finding solace in each other's company. But secrets have a way of surfacing, and the truth would soon test everything they had built. Jane Rivers, once a promising college student, found her world unraveling as her pregnancy progressed. The once lively halls of her university now felt alien to her, filled with whispers and stares. The exhaustion of balancing schoolwork, a part-time job, and her growing belly became unbearable. Jane eventually decided to take a leave of absence, retreating to her parents' home in the hopes of finding clarity and support. Her mother, Elise, and Elise's partner, Sarah, did their best to make Jane feel comfortable. Yet the tension in the house was palpable. Elise was racked with worry about Jane's future, while Sarah took a more protective, almost defiant stance. She saw Jane as vulnerable and believed it was her duty to shield her from the harsh realities the world had thrown her way. Amidst the chaos, Gabriel Daniels found himself thinking about Jane more often than he expected. He didn't fully understand why he felt such a connection to her. Maybe it was her honesty, her resilience, or the way she carried a quiet strength even in her darkest moments. Whatever the reason, Gabriel couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that he needed to check on her. One afternoon, Gabriel decided to visit Jane. He found himself standing on the doorstep of her family's modest home, unsure of what he would say. Sarah answered the door, her expression immediately hardening at the sight of the unfamiliar man. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone sharp and unwelcoming. "I'm here to see Jane," Gabriel said, his voice calm but determined. I want to make sure she's doing okay." Sarah stepped outside, closing the door behind her. "Listen, I don't know who you are or what your intentions are, but Jane doesn't need any more stress in her life. She's been through enough." Gabriel hesitated. He didn't want to argue, but he couldn't walk away either. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he said earnestly. "I just want to be there for her, as a friend." Sarah's eyes narrowed. She doesn't need a friend right now. What she needs is peace. So whatever this is, it ends here. Stay away from my daughter. Gabriel clenched his jaw, his frustration mounting. "I'm not trying to hurt her. I care about her." Sarah crossed her arms, unmoved. "Care from a distance. Don't come back here." The door closed firmly behind her, leaving Gabriel standing alone on the porch. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. He wasn't sure what he had expected, but the confrontation left him feeling both helpless and determined. Despite Sarah's warning, Gabriel and Jane's paths continued to cross, albeit less frequently. They would occasionally meet in public places, parks, coffee shops, and once, even a library. Their conversations grew deeper, filled with unspoken truths and a budding connection neither could fully explain. Jane found solace in Gabriel's company. He didn't treat her like a fragile glass ready to shatter, nor did he bombard her with questions she couldn't answer. He simply listened, offering quiet encouragement when she needed it most. "I don't understand why you're so kind to me," Jane said one evening as they sat on a park bench. The autumn leaves rustled around them, painting the world in shades of gold and crimson. Gabriel looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "Because you deserve kindness, Jane. Life's been unfair to you. but that doesn't mean you have to face it alone." His words lingered in her heart, a beacon of hope in the midst of her confusion and fear. However, their growing bond didn't go unnoticed. Priska, who had been growing suspicious of Gabriel's long walks and late nights, decided to follow him one evening. She had been scrolling through his phone earlier that week and found nothing incriminating, but her gut told her there was more to the story. Dressed inconspicuously, Priska trailed Gabriel to a small cafe. Her heart pounded as she saw him sitting across from Jane, their heads bent close together in deep conversation. Priska's blood boiled as she watched the easy smiles and the way Gabriel's eyes softened when he looked at the younger woman. Who was she? And why was Gabriel spending so much time with her? Priska's mind raced with possibilities, each more infuriating than the last. She snapped a photo of them with her phone, her hands trembling with rage. That night, Priska couldn't sleep. Her mind replayed the scene at the cafe, each detail fueling her anger. How dare Gabriel betray her trust like this? And who was that girl to think she could steal him away? The next morning, Priska decided she needed answers, but confrontation wasn't her style. No, Priska preferred to play the long game. She would dig deeper, learn everything she could about Jane Rivers, and find a way to make her pay for whatever hold she had over Gabriel. Priska's obsession grew. She began stalking Jane online, piecing together bits of her life through social media and mutual connections. She even went as far as to hire a private investigator to gather more information. The more she learned, the more determined she became to bring Jane's world crashing down. Meanwhile, Jane remained blissfully unaware of Priska's scheming. Her focus was on navigating her pregnancy and the growing friendship she shared with Gabriel. But as the weeks turned into months, the cracks in their fragile peace began to show. To be continued. If you enjoyed this story and can't wait to see what happens next, make sure to subscribe to our channel for part 2. Don't forget to like this video and leave a comment below with your thoughts on Gabriel and Jane's journey. What do you think will happen when the truth finally comes out? Let us know. We'd love to hear from you.
Please tell me, are you enjoying the story? If so, tell me, what lessons have you actually learned? I would really love to hear your comments in the comment section down below. And remember to support this channel. Please subscribe, like the video, comment, just say something. Even a word could literally mean a whole lot. So I want you to tell me, what lessons have you learned from this story? Trust me, these are situations that most people actually gone through. I'm sure some of you that are watching this story have actually gone through this situation. So I want to hear from you. I want to hear how you dealt with the situation that you were faced with.
Jane sat in her room, staring at the ultrasound picture on her desk. The tiny, blurry image of the life growing inside her brought a mix of emotions: fear, confusion, and a strange, unshakable bond. Her mother's voice called from the kitchen, grounding her thoughts momentarily. "Jane, dinner's ready." Elise's tone carried the weight of someone trying to keep the pieces of a fractured family together. As Jane made her way to the dining table, she noticed the tense atmosphere. Elise was stirring a pot absent-mindedly, while Sarah set the table with an unusual firmness. Jacob sat silently, his scarred face unreadable, though his presence always felt like a reminder of the cost of misplaced trust. "Are you okay?" Jacob finally broke the silence as Jane sat down. His voice was soft, but his eyes bore into hers. Jane nodded. "I'm trying. It's just hard." Before Jacob could respond, Sarah cut in. "Hard doesn't begin to describe it. We need answers, Jane. We can't keep pretending this is normal." Jane's chest tightened. "I've told you everything I know. I don't have answers either." Elise shot Sarah a warning glance. "Let's not push her tonight." But the air in the room was heavy, and the tension was palpable. Jane excused herself early, retreating to her room where she felt safer, even if her thoughts refused to grant her peace. Across town, Gabriel Daniels sat in his dimly lit office, staring at his reflection in the glass window. His world felt like it was spinning out of control, and the only thing keeping him grounded was the memory of Jane's smile. It was inexplicable, the connection he felt with her, the pull he couldn't resist. But every time he thought about her, guilt crept in. He had a wife, a life he had built, yet this stranger had somehow become the center of his thoughts. The door to his office swung open, and Priska walked in, her red lips pressed into a thin line. "You're working late again," she said, her tone icy. Gabriel didn't look at her. "I've had a lot on my mind." Priska stepped closer, her heels clicking against the floor. "I bet you have." Her words dripped with venom, but Gabriel didn't bite. "Is there something you need, Priska?" he asked calmly, turning to face her. Priska smirked, crossing her arms. "Shouldn't I be asking you that? You seem to be finding solace elsewhere these days." Gabriel's jaw tightened. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, don't play dumb," Priska snapped, pulling out her phone and showing him the photo she had taken at the cafe. "Who is she?" Gabriel's stomach dropped, but he kept his face neutral. "She's no one," he lied. Priska laughed bitterly. "No one? You look at her like she's the only thing keeping you alive. Don't insult my intelligence, Gabriel." "Drop it, Priska," Gabriel said, his voice low and dangerous. "You don't know what you're talking about." Priska leaned in closer, her eyes blazing. "Maybe not yet, but I will. Mark my words, Gabriel, I'll find out who she is and why you're so obsessed with her." Meanwhile, Jane sat in her room, scrolling through her messages. Stephanie had been her rock through this ordeal, but even she seemed to be growing distant. A text from her popped up. "You need to figure out who the father is, Jane. This isn't just going to go away." Jane sighed, her mind wandering back to Gabriel. He was the one person who made her feel less alone, even though she knew deep down she shouldn't rely on him. But how could she ignore the way he looked at her? Like he saw all the pieces of her she was too scared to show anyone else. The next morning, Gabriel couldn't resist. He found himself at the park where he and Jane often crossed paths. She was there, sitting on their usual bench, lost in thought. When she saw him, a small smile broke through her serious expression. "Hey," she said softly as he approached. "Hey," he replied, sitting beside her. "You look tired." Jane shrugged. "It's been a long week." Gabriel hesitated before speaking. "I don't know how to say this without overstepping, but I care about you, Jane, and I know you're going through something big. I just want you to know you're not alone." Jane's eyes filled with tears. "Why do you care so much? You barely know me." Gabriel took a deep breath. "I don't know, but I do, and I don't think I can just walk away." Jane looked at him, her heart pounding. She wanted to believe him, to trust him, but the weight of her secret held her back. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That means a lot." As they sat in silence, neither of them noticed the figure watching them from a distance. Priska stood behind a tree, her fists clenched and her mind racing. She wasn't just angry anymore, she was determined. If Gabriel wouldn't tell her the truth, she would find it herself. The tension in the air was suffocating, yet neither Jane nor Gabriel could completely detach from the strange comfort they found in each other. Their bond had grown deeper, but little did they know that a storm was brewing, one that would leave no part of their lives untouched. Meanwhile, Jane tried to make sense of her growing belly and the whirlwind of events that surrounded her. Her mother, Elise, and Sarah were more protective than ever, hovering around her like guards. But Jane felt isolated. No one truly understood what she was going through, not even Gabriel. Her best friend, Stephanie, was her only anchor. Over steaming mugs of hot chocolate in Jane's childhood bedroom, Stephanie whispered, "Have you thought about going back to the hospital? Maybe they made a mistake. Maybe, I don't know. There's some explanation for all of this." "I've thought about it," Jane admitted. But every time I try to call or even step near that place, I freeze. What if the truth is worse than the unknown? Stephanie took her hand. You have to face it, Jane. This isn't just about you anymore. You're carrying a life, a child. You deserve answers. But before Jane could muster the courage to uncover the truth, Priska was already one step ahead. Priska's obsession with Jane had grown into a dangerous fixation. Armed with the findings of her private investigator, she now knew Jane's name, her family background, and even the scandalous detail of her mysterious pregnancy. Priska smirked as she stared at the report. A pregnant college girl, unmarried and living with her two mothers? Oh, the irony. Gabriel's little charity project. But as she dug deeper, a horrifying realization hit her like a freight train. The dates didn't add up. Jane's pregnancy timeline perfectly matched the period when Gabriel and she had attempted surrogacy. Panic clawed at her chest. Could it be? Could Jane's child be Gabriel's? Priska's mind spiraled. If Gabriel found out, he'd never let her destroy Jane. Worse, he might leave her entirely. She couldn't let that happen. Not after everything she had sacrificed to stay by his side. She needed to take control, and fast. Priska decided to confront Jane directly, but instead of marching up to her door, she devised a more insidious plan. She crafted an anonymous letter filled with lies and half-truths and sent it to Elise. The letter claimed that Jane's pregnancy was the result of a secret affair and that the father was a married man who was already trying to cover his tracks. When Elise received the letter, her heart sank. Doubts crept into her mind. Was Jane keeping secrets from her? Was Sarah right to warn her against trusting Gabriel? Elise decided to confront her daughter that evening. Jane, Elise began, her voice trembling. I received this today. She slid the letter across the table. Jane's eyes widened as she read the contents. Her face turned pale, her hands shaking. This isn't true, she cried. Mom, I don't even know any married men. Sarah snatched the letter and read it aloud, her voice dripping with anger. This is absurd. It's just someone trying to stir trouble. Elise, you can't possibly believe this nonsense. But what if it's true? Elise whispered, tears welling in her eyes. What if we don't know the whole story? Jane bolted from the room, unable to handle the accusations. She ran to the park, the same park where she had first met Gabriel. And there he was, sitting on their usual bench, lost in thought. When Jane approached, her tears streaming down her face, Gabriel immediately stood up. Jane, what's wrong? They think I'm lying, she sobbed. My mom, my family, they think I've done something terrible. Gabriel pulled her into a comforting embrace. I believe you, he said softly. No matter what happens, I believe you. Unbeknownst to Jane and Gabriel, Priska's plot was already in motion. At the same time, Elise was pacing the living room floor, her mind racing. The letter had shaken her, but Sarah's words haunted her more. Sarah was calm now, sipping tea in the corner. You shouldn't have shown her the letter, she said quietly. It's not about the truth. It's about trust. Right now, Jane needs us to trust her. Elise stopped pacing. And what if we're trusting her at the expense of protecting her? What if whoever wrote this letter knows more than we do? Sarah raised an eyebrow. And what would you do? Hunt down this anonymous accuser? Or confront Gabriel? The name lingered in the air like a dark cloud. Gabriel. He had come into their lives so suddenly, so conveniently, just as Jane's pregnancy had begun to weigh her down emotionally. Elise bit her lip, recalling his polite manners, his way of making Jane laugh when no one else could. But Sarah was right. How much did they really know about him? And more importantly, what was he hiding? As night fell, Elise sat by the kitchen table, staring at the letter again. Her thoughts churned as she resolved to investigate Gabriel herself. Something didn't sit right, and she couldn't shake the feeling that Jane's safety, and the safety of her unborn grandchild might depend on the answers she found. That same night, while Elise wrestled with doubts and Jane sought solace with Gabriel, a storm was brewing at the hospital where Jane had first discovered her pregnancy. Nurse Priska, donning her fake identity with chilling precision, had embedded herself into the hospital's staff unnoticed. Her obsession with control and power had driven her to unimaginable lengths, and Jane's case had caught her eye. Priska had slipped into the hospital records room earlier that evening. Her heart raced as she typed Jane Rivers' patient ID into the system. Her fingers trembled when the screen revealed an unusual anomaly in the pregnancy reports. 2 files with conflicting dates, 2 fetuses registered under Jane Rivers' name. One file listed her pregnancy as normal, while the other referenced a mysterious surrogacy procedure. Priska's lips curled into a sinister smile. "So it's true," she muttered under her breath. Gabriel and Jane were connected in ways even they didn't fully understand. She quickly downloaded the files onto a USB stick and erased any traces of her access. Her next step was clear. She would confront Jane directly, not to expose the truth, but to manipulate it. Priska's plan wasn't just to drive a wedge between Gabriel and Jane, it was to destroy them both. As dawn broke, Jane woke with sharp, stabbing pains in her lower abdomen. Panic set in as the realization hit her. She was going into labor. She called out for her mother, her voice trembling with fear. Elise rushed into the room, her face pale. "We need to get you to the hospital now," she said, helping Jane to her feet. At the hospital, chaos ensued as doctors and nurses hurried to prepare for the delivery. Priska, now dressed in her nurse's uniform, watched from the corner of the room, her expression unreadable. Jane didn't recognize her, too consumed by pain and fear to notice the malice in Priska's eyes. As the hours passed, Jane's cries echoed through the hospital halls. Gabriel, who had been waiting anxiously in the lobby, pushed past the nurses and burst into the delivery room. "I'm here," he said, taking Jane's hand. "You're not alone." But Priska was ready for him. She stepped forward, her voice calm, yet filled with venom. "I don't think you're supposed to be here, Mr. Daniels. This is a family matter." Gabriel froze, his eyes narrowing. "Who are you?" Priska smiled. "I'm Nurse Priska. I've been assigned to Jane's case. And I have to say, it's fascinating how much you've been involved. Almost suspiciously so." Jane's grip on Gabriel's hand tightened as her contractions intensified. "What is she talking about?" she managed to gasp. Priska leaned in closer, her voice low and icy. "Oh, you haven't told her? How interesting. Maybe you'd like to explain why her pregnancy records list your name, Gabriel?" Gabriel's face turned ashen. "That's impossible," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Is it?" Priska countered, holding up the USB stick she had stolen. "Because I have all the proof right here."
If you made it to the end of part 2 of this thrilling story, then all I can say is congratulations and thank you. These videos really take a lot of time to make. But you guys' support really keep me going. Comments below and share this video with your friends and family. Also, like and subscribe to the channel so that you'll be the first to be notified when I drop a new video.